Hello and welcome to this session. This is a session being recorded on behalf of the Plus Change Project. My name is Annika Lundqvist. I am currently based in Warsaw, Poland, and I'm the founder of pedestrianspace.org, which is a platform and an NGO devoted to issues of urban resilience with a focus on walkability and sustainable mobility. And I'm really excited. Today, we're going to be talking with Simon Lowe, who is a partner based in Surrey, which is one of the practice cases for this project called Plus Change. Very briefly, I want to share what that is. Plus Change is an EU-funded Horizon project that aims to create strategies and decision-making processes for land use, addressing issues related to climate change, biodiversity, and human well-being. So the Plus Change project has 12 cases, of which Simon, based in Surrey, is one. Surrey is one of those practice cases, and we're going to be digging into that locality today and their challenges and diverse issues and objectives. And just to share a bit about the cases with the Plus Change project, you can visit the website for Plus Change to explore more. But there are 12 cases which serve as real-world examples of land use decision-making and action in diverse geographic areas across urban, rural, and peri-urban context. So today we're going to be talking with Simon. And I think, Simon, I would just like to turn it right over to you and get a brief introduction from you as well. Maybe lay the scene for Surrey as well.
Certainly. Thank you, Annika. Nice to be here today. I'm Simon Lowe, and Surrey is one of the 12 practice case partners in Plus Change. And Surrey is a county just on the southwestern edge of London, the capital of the UK. So it spans an area right from the London fringes right into very green and rural areas. So it has a real mix of land uses and types, a wide diversity of populations within there as well. And within there, a lot of land use challenges, from agriculture use to increasing population growth and the pressures that brings. And yeah, Surrey is technically then, well, this part of Surrey, the northern part of Surrey, is where the Plus Change focus is. So the northern part is the part that is closest to London, closest to Heathrow Airport. And that brings a range of issues that we felt would be particularly interesting for Plus Change to focus on. So it is that urban fringe, that peri-urban area, and it is an area that is going through a lot of change. So that's the focus of Surrey, rather than it being the entire county for Plus Change. And yeah, we've been working on Plus Change for about 12, 18 months now.
Okay, so really interesting. So from a geographical stance, and also where the heart of the focus is for Surrey, I'm saying it right, Surrey.
Sorry, yeah.
Right. The northern part is where the focus is. So the connecting up with the Heathrow area.
Well, it's not necessarily the focus for Surrey, no, but it is a focus that we felt would be applicable for Plus Change. So it is an area which is maybe has interesting challenges that it is facing at the moment. So the different types of land use, there are pressures on land use for more housing, but also to preserve green space. There are more pressures on housing because it is commutable to London. And there are obviously big attractors like Heathrow, but not very far away. But there's a lot of beautiful rural space here as well, which there is a desire to protect. So it's that balance between those differing needs is an area of focus that Plus Change is more connected to. But Surrey as a whole is very diverse and has a lot of challenges right across the area.
Okay, so with that particular area in mind, that is the focus for the Plus Change project. So I know at the Plus Change case page for Surrey, it's mentioned that their quote is a focus on improving connectivity within Surrey and establishing better links between strategically important hubs to enhance transportation and accessibility. So can you expand a bit on that?
I mean, really, that is being led by a policy which is the local transport plan. So all um, local government areas in the UK need to have one of these. And that for Surrey's is one which is setting the agenda for transport in the whole county. And obviously, it is cognizant of those things adjacent to it, for example, those airports and London being right there as well. But the agenda is being set for one which is trying to shift towards sustainable transport and better connections with that. And those better connections could be hydrogen buses. There's an e-bike scheme which has been launched, something like that. There could be new cycle connections. It could be public realm enhancements in the town centre. So there are lots of things that may come out of that. But that policy, LTP4 is what it's abbreviated to, is setting the scene, setting the agenda for everything that the county does when it comes to transport. And so that is around, like I say, that focus on trying to improve connections, particularly with a sustainability focus.
Okay, now I serve as an ambassador for the Plus Change project representing the needs of walkability, which, as we know, connects to so many things. But I'm curious, public transit is a vital part of walkability, right? So I'm curious about the current state of public transit in that particular area, and if that is also sort of a focus for that improved connectivity.
It is. It's perhaps worth outlining that in the UK, the county is only responsible for certain things within the transport hierarchy. So, for let's say buses, for example, so yes, but when it comes to rail, that is managed nationally. Um, so there are challenges with that. A lot of being on the London Fringe. Surrey, and this happens in most cities, not just in the UK, but elsewhere. But it is a little bit of a radial pattern. So Surrey does reasonably well with connections into central London, but for those that are trying to cross those paths, then that's a lot more difficult. So, for example, some of the northern, I know I mentioned Heathrow a couple of times, some northern suburbs some northern Surrey suburbs are quite geographically close to Heathrow, and that is not just a holiday destination, but obviously it's a huge employer. But those connections by public transit can be quite challenging given how close it is. Whereas you could get maybe 5 times the distance into central London much more quickly. So that's an example of how the public transit network has just grown over time. And then, yeah, the responsibilities for developing and maintaining and managing those networks also differ between different bodies.
Okay, interesting. So one thing that I do at my NGO and with my research activities is not only thinking about the existing infrastructure and connections existing, but also what I call the psychological infrastructure. So, the mobility preferences of people, habits, desires. So I'm curious if in this area, what might that look like in terms of walkability, car dependence? Is it a car dependent heavy area? Is there a lot of difficulty with behavior change or stigmas? I come from a country where there's a lot of stigma, the US on public transit in part because sometimes there's not adequate provision that leads to the stigma, but also there's this cycle, the car dependent desire, also lends the stigma to public transit. So what's the situation there?
So there is I would say, a high level of car dependency. Yes. And again, that occurs in the UK, most places outside of the large cities. Whereas, I mean, London, obviously the biggest city, and it does better there. But yeah, in Surrey, there is a high level of car dependency. A lot of that is down to the level of density of development that has happened over decades, centuries. And so that comes with higher car dependency because the connections are more difficult. And I mentioned in the previous note about some of those difficult connections, particularly if they're not going to London or directly out of. So yes, there's a higher degree of car dependency, that can obviously bring a lot of problems with road safety, with the quality of the air, with people's how much exercise people are getting, and so on, a raft of associated issues. In addition to even things like people's health and well-being and social cohesion as well. One of the things that I might be jumping ahead here, but one of the things that we've been trying to address more in recent years in Surrey is that since COVID times, a lot, I mentioned that Surrey was in a very commutable place to central London. Since COVID times, obviously, people are not doing that maybe as frequently as they were. So it might have been 5 times a week. Now it might be 4 or 3 or less for people that are in, let's say, white collar fields. And so there is an increasing focus, or at least a desire to focus more on local towns where people are spending more time, and the importance of those local town centres in one's health and well-being, and social cohesion is really important, which, we saw that massively in COVID when we lacked that. And so there's a desire to try and push more emphasis from the council onto our local towns and villages where people are going to be spending more time.
Okay, that's really interesting. That's very exciting to me because my own research here in Warsaw is about walkability and, dare I say it, because you're in the UK, but the 15-minute city, which I know popped up a lot of controversy there, but that's my research. So I look at how that concept is manifest at the local level, and I can only imagine in local towns and villages there, you have a plethora of examples actually of ability to live at that neighborhood local level. Of course, many people, their work is not always local, but then in their time off, they have that ease of proximity to spend their leisure time or do their errands in a really, practical local way that's not exhausting and requiring long distance commuting just to do some errands. So I'm really interested to hear more about that. So if I am correct, I want to kind of summarize what you just said. There's the interest of councils to help increase that desire and ability for people to spend more time in local towns and villages, but there's also, due to the pandemic and what happened during that time, there's the interest from people themselves to also have that enriching local life.
Well, I mean, I can only speak about what's happening in Surrey, and like I said at the beginning, I'm not speaking on behalf of, but I can speak about Surrey in the context of Plus Change. But yes, there is a desire to focus more attention on local towns and villages because people are spending more time there, and there's a desire to encourage people to spend more time there. Again, not wanting to speak for on the second part of your sentence about people in general. But I think that even if it hasn't been stated, we all, those of us that are, have office jobs, let's say, lots of us now don't go in 5 days a week. I mean, myself, I'm in the office as we're speaking today, but even here we are on video. Whereas tomorrow I'll be at home, and so even if you think about where you have your lunch or where you go for your morning coffee or whatever you're doing. And so local towns and villages are or can adapt to make the most of that. And I think that one of the three main focuses of Plus Change is on health and well-being. And that where that comes into a human connection, we all saw that in COVID. We all suffered from that where we were stuck at home for however many months. And that really is one of the things where we would like the local town and village centres to be able to play more of a role in that, enabling people to connect. And ideally without the need to go and, have to spend that somewhere privately and spend money in somewhere. If you can do that in your local park or, in the local high street, even better.
Yeah, there's the economic ramifications are pretty significant, but just
Yeah.
as importantly, maybe if not even more so, I think is what you brought up, the social well-being factor. Uh,
Mhm.
and also earlier, the social inclusion factor, which I believe you also connected up with the car dependence issue, which is an issue in so many places.
Yeah.
There's a term as well, transport exclusion.
Yeah.
this reality that there's a lot of people for whom they can't drive, or they're captive passengers, or they don't want to drive, and
Mhm.
they are denied access to a social life, their social
Yeah.
life well-being. And then I really like how you're continuously referring back to the pandemic, because I feel like this is sort of becoming a collective, like, dusty nook in the collective mind. People are forgetting. They're kind of like, let's push that away. But
Mhm.
I think for people like you and I and others working with these issues, it's actually a really rich chapter of time, unfortunately, due to unfortunate circumstances. But to go back to and to say, look at how this changed things. The fact that you also brought up the remote work, also a
Mhm.
product, so much a product. Of course, there were people working remotely before, but the
Mhm.
pandemic opened up to so much hybrid work, which then can go and feed into that, rejuvenation of local town living. I'm really curious, anecdotally. I know you can't speak for the population or all people, but I'm really curious to hear anecdotally. Um, First of all, do you see any generational trends with this, this shift to wanting to spend time in local towns and village? Are you seeing also from elderly retired to also young people enjoying that localism? I'm really curious. I'll have to follow up with you after this, maybe to peek around at some research. And then also, I'm really curious. In my mind, I'm already seeing like campaigns, different council campaigns about this, returning to this vibrance of localism and, place marketing from the standpoint of local towns and villages. So maybe you don't have answers on the campaigns right now, but I'd like to follow up on that later. I'm really curious about that. But the generational aspect, are you anecdotally observing any?
Um, I'm not sure that I do really. I mean, I would point toward probably the middle-age groups, so maybe like 30 to 60, those that are working and again perhaps working or have the ability to work remotely. So that's where that is. And but then I mean those that are younger, if you're going to school or university and college and so on, then that those obviously there might be things that are happening online, but those movement patterns may not have changed as much. So I'm not really sure if I would know the answer to that, or if it's very clear as to who's maybe more keen on the um, push for localism. The campaigns, I mean, even before, I know we've talked a little bit about COVID, but even before that, I mean, a lot of particularly mid-range towns in the UK have struggled for, well, you could say the last 20 years, you could say the last 40 years, really. Um, Retail decline, and certainly, some political policies towards certain things or other have had influence on that too. Um, as well as post-industrialization phases. And so a lot of towns have wanted to try and reinvent themselves, whether that is as a tourist destination or with a bunch of new industry or whatever it is to try and attract people in. Um, and but one of the often the root of those or what they all come down to is about people spending time. So it used to always be about shopping. And with, online shopping obviously having taken off more and more and more in the last 10, 20 years and continue to do so, um, for towns to be completely dependent on that is questionable now. But where there is the ability for more to lean toward is where people come to connect. And whether that is to do something like we're going, I don't know, rock climbing, or we're just hanging out and going for a walk and we might look at the flowers or grab a cup of coffee, whatever it is, or anything in between. You'll walk home from school, the things that we might do every day or we might do every now and then. A town centre can play a role in that, in your health and well-being, and vice versa. You can play a role in the health and well-being of the town.
Well, I'm completely sold. All this is music to my ears. Thinking about rejuvenation of town centers, walkability, and social well-being. It's the full package. So Yeah, I would like to hear more about your thoughts with walkability, maybe also, so maybe some best practices and barriers in the context of Surrey from your viewpoint, some unique issues there that we can look at that um, related to walkability.
I mean, some of the larger towns in Surrey have got some good examples of walkability going on. So, particularly Woking, Camberley, and Guildford, I would say, are towns that have invested in the walkability of the town centre. And they're in a aesthetically a reasonably pleasant place. Um, the impact of that on their economic health, I probably wouldn't be able to comment. Guildford is the largest town, and it's probably the most economically robust, but don't quote me on that. But I would strongly suggest that their walkable improvements have led to how people feel about the towns, how much people, how much time people spend there, maybe how much money they spend there, but certainly how much time they spend there, what people go to do there. And I also think how people feel about their town centre. It might be a push to say there's a level of pride, but maybe a little bit, and or maybe a little bit less of negativity toward it. Yeah.
Well, again, I am going to be really interested to follow up with you because I just see a bevy of research topics here that probably maybe there's others I can connect to on these, but so much and so much probably cutting edge research that could come from this related to what we were talking about earlier, the social connectivity, but also potential economic robustness related to that prioritization of walkable environments. So what about some barriers? We have to look at the challenges because that's why we're also doing the work we're doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So some of the significant barriers.
Well, I mean, we touched upon earlier on the lower level of housing density, and the continued reliance on private cars. So that is still a big problem. And even of those, the town centres that I just gave you a moment ago, those examples, you get outside of the centre of those, and that walkability would drop off quite quickly. Um, Certainly when it comes to things like new developments, um, they often can just concern, one small patch, rather than looking at something in a wider picture. Um, and walkability specifically, it might be difficult for planning applications to be challenged or certainly refused on something like that. Um, the other challenge that is related to this in multiple counties in the UK is that the land planning authority is maybe not necessarily the same as the transport authority. So Surrey has that situation. So Surrey is the highway authority, but it's not the land planning authority for development. So if somebody is building a block of flats, that's one organization, but the highway is managed by another. So obviously those organizations work together, but it isn't one organization that's managing them all. So that can create challenges there as well. And when it comes to, on that note, developers, they are more likely to see walkability as less than the number one priority. We have recently in Surrey launched what's called Healthy Streets for Surrey, which is a design code, and that assists developers in thinking about these kind of things. It's also available for guide on retrofit high streets, but its primary aim was for developers, and that is aiming to help them think about and come to the table on design for high streets, or at least the areas around where the developer is going to be. So that's a little bit of a stepping stone. But yeah, there are multiple barriers in there, and not least of all, with walkability and anything like this, the cost involved as well, which can be significant.
Well, as you were talking about developers who, I think this is the case in many places, don't always prioritize walkability. In my mind, I was thinking, oh, I want to ask him maybe what advice he might have from his own professional experience about engaging them. Somebody like myself looking to, do further academic work, research on walkability, knowing that that can be a barrier, developers' interest, or consultancy work. And then you brought up Healthy Streets for Surrey as a stepping stone, which, I guess is the package of advice. But if you could share a bit here, so say I was coming there and I'm going to collaborate with some people for some local workshops. What is some advice for engaging with those developers for whom walkability might not be a priority and communicating in that local context there, the role it plays? Are there certain groups that you bring up? I will also take a look at Healthy Streets for Surrey, of course, but are there certain groups you
Yeah.
emphasize or any
Um,
triggers?
I think something might be that it's actually very sellable for developers. If we're talking about developers that are building residential units, and um, now, I mean, in the UK, certainly the further away from your city you would go, I'm sure the advertising paraphernalia would come with, car parking spaces and the like. Um, but often, and this is certainly in the cities, but even so outside of that, how they're often being imaged is one of where someone can sit outside, on their balcony or in the communal gardens with a cup of coffee, or they can walk to the library down the road or to the train station. Again, if we're thinking about this being Surrey traditionally has been a town, a county full of commuter towns into London. Acknowledge that that has changed somewhat in recent years, but that still exists. And so the ability to walk to that train station, because parking there would be very difficult and very expensive, that's attractive. And so I do think that developers can use walkability as a selling point for properties. Also bearing in mind that with we're in or have been through some difficult cost of living years recently, and the cost of a house or an apartment can be added to significantly by the cost of a parking space. And you may want one, you may want two, you may want none, depending on your situation. And I think certainly you touched upon generational before. I do wonder whether those younger in the 15 to 20, 25 bracket are certainly in the cities and city fringes turning away from car dependency a little bit, and wanting to be able to get around independently without a driving license and do what they want rather than being at the behold of a traffic jam or a car parking fine or whatever it is. Um, Sort of lost my trail of thought there, but
We are covering a lot of territory. Yeah, walkability as a selling point. You're so right. To the
yes, selling
extent
point. Yes, that was it.
I would
Yes.
say I see this more in my own home country. I see it very much walkability being a selling point within real estate, and on the other side, a lot of community groups being really nervous because of the gentrification potential that comes in. Of course, you want, uh, you know, safe pedestrian infrastructure for your community, but the idea that doing that would then also lead to gentrification and displacement. I mean, it's a really complicated bag. So I'm always trying to emphasize equity and how do we make sure people aren't displaced because we're prioritizing human mobility. So it's really interesting to learn about this in different contexts. And I'm so excited by what you said about the commuter towns because just on a personal note, I lived in a very remote rural region of Germany. I lived in Bavaria in the deep rural areas, and there was many villages. We happened to luck out and have a train in our village, very small village, 5 minutes, end to end. And that train transformed my quality of life, my
Mhm.
social connectivity, ability to go to the city to do work. So that commuter town, um, aspect that you have there in your context and that ability to walk to the train station, I mean, it's radical for quality of life and social connectivity and so many things. So yet another thing I'm going to put on the list about things to look into there for
Mm.
who's doing some research, because it would be really interesting if there are some towns that lack the train. Obviously, then looking at how much car dependence upticks in those other towns, how many people are captive. You have teenagers
Mm.
who can't drive, waiting for parents to chauffeur them around, whereas in the commuter towns, more people can have more autonomy because the train station is a walk away.
Yeah, I mean, if you are within walkable distance of it, and some are, but obviously some are not. So even in these larger towns in Surrey, like Guildford and Woking, and they have good connections to central London, there will be a lot of people that would be able to walk there, but a lot of people would still not be within walkable distance. And so that might then be a bus journey or a car journey to there, which is less than the ideal. The ideal is being able to walk, but um, some do, and I would suggest that certainly working in Guildford have seen more residential developments closer to the centre of the town in recent decades, partly drawn by that desire to be within walking distance of either the town centre or the train station or both.
Really interesting. So yeah, there's such a mix of issues going on there. Well, to round off with, I want to go back to what I think connects to what you were talking about with the you should see my notes. What connects to this the town center rejuvenation, regeneration, and social life and connectivity and localism. At the Plus Change case page, this is public. Anybody can go to the website and look at that. It notes that the region also aims, the region of Surrey, to enhance the appeal and offerings of its towns and urban areas. So I do want to end this on a somewhat upbeat note. We have a lot of challenges to deal with, which is why these projects exist. But I want to end on a bit of an upbeat note and hear from you what you feel is the appeal and the offerings of this area for people that don't know, or even people that are there, and just to hear your perspective on the appeal and offerings of Surrey.
Well, I mean, Surrey as a whole has a lot to offer. Whether that is its unique towns and villages, or whether it's its rural areas and some of its areas of outstanding natural beauty, which is probably what it's known best for. However, I think in that context that you mentioned, that is on the Plus Change website, and it talks about enhancing the appeal of its towns and villages, it is very much the work that we have touched upon today, which is in increasing, the appeal of the towns and villages, and that might be from teams that are working in economic stability, or in placemaking, or in sustainable transport, or in environmental sustainability. It could be all of these that are working to improve those towns and villages, and that is all with the driving agendas around health and well-being, social cohesion, economic growth, and enabling everyone to live healthier, more prosperous lives in Surrey, whether they're a resident, a visitor, or someone who works here.
Very interesting. Plus Change is continuing for another 2 years, correct? We're at almost the year
Hmm.
mark. So I
Uh-huh.
will be really looking forward to seeing more about Surrey as a practice case as time develops. Anybody can go to the website. I'll include the links when I post this. And maybe we'll return for a talk with you later on down the line. So I really appreciate your time and sharing with us insights from Surrey today. Thank you.
Thank you.